You might want to grab a seat because what is unfolding in the football world is being presented as a massive controversy involving the Premier League, the Argentine national team, and a long-running dispute over the Falkland Islands. What began around a highly charged match between Argentina and England has allegedly escalated far beyond football, with claims of political tension, public backlash, and even questions surrounding the immigration status of Argentine players in the United Kingdom. The controversy centers on an alleged incident in which Argentine players displayed a large banner claiming that the Falkland Islands belonged to Argentina. According to the source, the gesture was made immediately after the final whistle and was portrayed as an extraordinary provocation on British soil. The incident is presented as especially controversial because it allegedly took place in front of English supporters and involved players who earned substantial salaries while playing for British clubs. The source argues that the players were not simply making an ordinary football joke or engaging in traditional South American football banner. Instead, it describes the display as touching one of the most sensitive historical and political subjects in British society. The Falkland Islands dispute carries decades of history, and the source claims that bringing the issue into a football environment transformed an already heated sporting rivalry into something much more politically charged. According to the script, the gesture triggered intense anger among sections of the English public, football supporters, and political commentators. The source portrays the incident as more than ordinary football banner, arguing that it touched on sensitive issues involving British sovereignty, national pride, and the memory of the Falklands War. Calls for severe consequences allegedly followed, including demands to cancel the players' work visas and prevent Argentine footballers from continuing their careers in England. The reaction described in the script goes far beyond the idea of a normal football suspension. Instead of simply discussing disciplinary action from football authorities, the source describes a growing debate about whether the British government could become involved. It claims that some political groups and commentators were demanding long-term restrictions on Argentine players, potentially preventing them from playing in England in the future. The script presents this as an extraordinary situation in which football, immigration policy, politics, and national identity have suddenly collided. The source also emphasizes a complicated immigration environment surrounding foreign footballers in the United Kingdom. It argues that British immigration rules can be strict and suggests that behavior considered contrary to the public interest could potentially create serious consequences. The pressure described in the script is therefore directed not only toward football organizations, but also toward British immigration authorities and the Football Association. It portrays the situation as one in which authorities could face enormous public pressure to take action. Several prominent Argentine players are then drawn into the controversy. Emiliano Martinez of Aston Villa is highlighted because of his previous reputation for provocative celebrations and on-field gestures. The source describes Martinez as someone who has already attracted controversy in English football, making him an especially recognizable figure in the latest dispute. According to the script, his reputation makes the situation even more explosive because supporters are already familiar with his controversial moments. Christian Romero of Tottenham is also mentioned as another major figure facing criticism. The source suggests that his reputation as a passionate and aggressive defender has made him a prominent personality among Tottenham supporters. The script claims that some fans view his involvement in the political display as a serious betrayal, particularly because he represents a major Premier League club in England. The situation involving Enzo Fernández of Chelsea and Lautaro Martinez of Manchester United is portrayed as even more serious in the source. They are described as players who were allegedly singled out amid accusations of provoking English players during the match. The script claims that British media reports had identified them as particularly influential figures in the controversy, although these claims are presented within the source's narrative rather than supported by independent evidence. It alleges that their behavior during the match included insults and attempts to unsettle English players, which, when combined with the banner incident, supposedly intensified the backlash. Alexis Mac Allister of Liverpool is also brought into discussion as someone allegedly connected to the political display. The source portrays him as a comparatively calmer personality, but says that his involvement nevertheless placed him under scrutiny. Because Mac Allister plays for one of England's biggest clubs, the script argues that the controversy could have consequences extending beyond the national team and directly into Premier League club environments. The source then asked the audience to consider the potential legal and financial consequences for Premier League clubs. Chelsea, Manchester United, Tottenham, and Aston Villa are presented as organizations that have invested enormous sums in Argentine players. If those players were suddenly unable to play because of immigration restrictions, the clubs could theoretically face a complicated contractual situation. The script describes a scenario in which clubs would possess expensive players who could no longer participate in training or competitive matches in England. The financial consequences are presented as potentially enormous. The script imagines clubs having to react quickly, possibly attempting to sell their Argentine stars to teams in Italy, Spain, or other European leagues. Because rival clubs would know that the players were supposedly under extraordinary pressure, the source argues that their market value could decline dramatically. This would potentially leave Premier League clubs facing significant financial losses after spending huge amounts of money to acquire the players in the first place. The script then shifts attention toward FIFA and asks why football's global governing body will be involved, or, according to source, why it would allegedly remain silent. The source argues that political, religious, or personal demonstrations inside sporting environments can be restricted under football regulations. It presents football stadiums as places where political disputes are ideally supposed to remain outside the competition itself. The source specifically mentions FIFA President Gianni Infantino and argues that FIFA's alleged silence has frustrated critics in England. According to the script, some people interpret the lack of an immediate response as evidence that Argentine footballers are being treated differently or receiving special protection. The narrative suggests that the English side could therefore attempt to rely on national immigration laws if football authorities did not impose their own sanctions. At the same time, the script acknowledges that many people in Argentina could view the banner as an expression of national identity and a long-standing claim over the Falkland Islands. The source explains that defending Argentina's position on the islands can be understood as a deeply emotional national issue. From that perspective, the players could argue that displaying the banner was an expression of loyalty to their country rather than an attempt to personally attack English citizens. However, the source then presents the opposing argument that there is a difference between expressing national pride and deliberately raising a sensitive political dispute while playing in another country. It argues that football provides a massive international platform and that using such a platform to revisit historical conflicts can create unnecessary hostility. The script therefore frames the controversy as an ethical debate about where football ends and political expression begins. The controversy is then connected to a broader discussion about the reputation of Argentine football in Europe. The script references previous incidents involving Argentine players and suggests that critics believe a pattern of provocative behavior has damaged the team's image. It describes a growing perception among some commentators that the Argentine squad has repeatedly pushed the boundaries of acceptable behavior through mocking gestures, confrontations, and provocative actions. Leandro Paredes is also mentioned even though he does not play in the Premier League. The source claims that his name has appeared in English football discussions because commentators allegedly associate him with a broader image of aggressive Argentine football. The script uses this example to suggest that the controversy has expanded beyond the players who are directly employed by English clubs. For Premier League clubs, the potential reputational consequences are described as another major concern. The league promotes itself as a global and inclusive sporting competition, so the script argues that political controversy involving high-profile foreign players could create difficulties with sponsors, supporters, and club leadership. It asks how clubs could explain such a situation to international commercial partners if their biggest stars became involved in a political dispute with the country hosting the league. The source speculates that clubs such as Chelsea, Tottenham Hotspur, and Aston Villa could eventually issue carefully worded statements distancing themselves from the controversy. In an extreme scenario, it imagines clubs accepting the departure of their star players simply to protect their institutional reputation and avoid additional pressure from British authorities. Again, this is presented as a hypothetical scenario within the script rather than an established outcome. The source then presents the controversy as a serious breakdown in trust between Argentine football and British society. It argues that repairing such a relationship would require more than a simple apology or social media statement, because the dispute involves historical emotions that go far beyond the football pitch. The script suggests that if extreme measures were ever implemented, Some of the players could be forced to consider alternative destinations in European football. The possibility of World Cup champions being forced out of England is presented as the most dramatic image of the entire controversy. The source asks viewers to imagine internationally famous footballers being escorted to an airport by immigration officials and leaving the country despite their status as elite athletes. It presents such a scenario as an unprecedented moment that would send a powerful message about the limits of political expression in English football. The script also raises questions about the responsibility of footballers as role models. Millions of young fans follow these players, imitate their celebrations, wear their shirts, and look up to them as sporting heroes. The source argues that when footballers become involved in political disputes and historical rivalries, their behavior can influence how supporters understand those conflicts. It therefore presents mutual respect as an important foundation of international sport. Ultimately, the story is framed as a debate rather than a settled conclusion. The audience is asked whether threatening players with deportation would be a fair response to displaying a political banner, or whether such a punishment would represent an excessive reaction. The script also asks whether the Argentine players cross a line that should have consequences, or whether they were simply expressing loyalty to their country's history and identity. Another central question is FIFA's responsibility. The source argues that football's governing authorities should establish clear boundaries when political disputes enter the sport. If FIFA does not respond to controversial demonstrations, the script suggests that national governments could feel compelled to take matters into their own hands. This creates a difficult situation in which sporting organizations and governments could potentially become involved in the same dispute for very different reasons. The story closes by encouraging viewers to participate in the debate and share their opinions. Rather than presenting the controversy as a simple argument between Argentina and England, it raises broader questions about nationalism, freedom of expression, football regulations, immigration policy, and the responsibilities of professional athletes. The source emphasizes that the consequences could extend beyond one match and potentially influence how international football handles political demonstrations in the future. The final message is deliberately dramatic, asking whether England could actually take action against some of Argentina's World Cup champions, and whether the Premier League could be forced to deal with an unprecedented political controversy involving some of its biggest stars. The script encourages viewers to follow the developing story, comment on whether the players should face punishment, and subscribe for further coverage. It ends by portraying the dispute as a story that could continue to develop and potentially become one of the biggest football controversies of the European summer.